Where we going? Rob. Okay. Rob Wilson. I don't know if Rob was introduced. Rob's been our counsel forever. Rob has all kinds of stories about the old days, so I'll give you the podium, Rob.
Oh, hi, everybody. Yeah, so I do this, huh? Okay, so you know the Egg Board is a marketing board, and that's a very special type of organization, because all the things that you've heard about, which the board does and does a good job on, such as pricing and limiting the supply of eggs to serve the market and convincing the feds to have border controls, pricing and controlling the quantity, those are illegal acts in Canada. We have a thing called the Competition Act, and it's against the law for anything organized that's in restraint of trade. So the government has made a huge exception to the law of the land, allowing supply management in the agricultural sector. So it's an extremely unusual thing to have in today's world. And I guess you could say it's precious to all of you, because without it, you wouldn't be doing all of this.
To the point that when the egg system was set up, they had an emergency callback of all the federal members between Christmas and New Year's of 1972 or 73, just to vote on the egg legislation. So imagine a crisis so important that they called back the House of Commons between Christmas and New Year's to vote on agricultural legislation that happening today. So that's why we work like crazy to defend what we have and understand the benefit of what we have.
So that's so a big part of the mandate of the Egg Board is to defend you by defending this precious system that you have. And when I say their response to crisis, well, the whole idea of having an egg marketing board was a response to a very real, very serious crisis. And you've heard about how bad things were, but what you haven't heard about is there was a lot of resistance to having a marketing board. And there were a lot of people in the egg industry who did not want a marketing board. And that's a little before my time. I'm not that old, but I came along shortly after when the battles were still being fought, because unfortunately court proceedings take years, not weeks. And in the early years, until fairly recently, there were always a segment of egg farmers who wanted to buck the system, who cheated. They'd go over quota, they'd put in a few extra cages, or there'd be side deals on this, or shenanigans going on. And that's still, I suppose, there's a little bit of leakage here and there, but Albert has his staff out there monitoring your behavior. So as new producers, your behavior has to be in full compliance with all the rules, because a system that has a privilege like you have, if the people within the system aren't following their own rules, then the politicians can easily say, goodbye, we're not taking all this heat for people that are out there cheating their own system. And I know that's why some marketing boards were set up, and one was quite a few years ago. There was a rutabaga marketing board, turnips. Well, they didn't last long because all the boys decided that the rules were for everyone else but them. And the Minister of Agriculture found out and just pulled the plug and said no more marketing board for rutabagas. So it could happen to eggs. So again, it's very important that you recognize that the board's mandate is to have an orderly marketing system with stable prices and the right quantity of eggs at the right time. It's a political organization as well. As producers, you have a vote. So it's a very important vote. You pick the men and women that are going to represent you as councillors in your zone, and then that group chooses who your director is going to be on the board. So it's a wonderful system that way, because you've got the provincial government and the federal government at the top, but I like to reverse it. I say you're at the top because you're the egg farmers and pullet farmers, and you have a say in how this system's going to work. As long as you stay within the rules that the government's given you. So what does your board do? Well, they do a lot. I've had the privilege of going to board meetings for quite a number of years now. I remember going to them in Willowdale. That's how long I've been around. So there's a meeting every month at least, and special meetings when required. And a very important part of what the board does is they bring to the table their own experiences and the feedback they've got from people like yourselves back home of the dynamics of the egg and pullet industry. It's not just something that's the same every day or every week. It's always changing. So the board is always trying to be one step ahead of what's needed. And sometimes the tools they have to do that, they have to be creative in applying the rules because laws don't change very often. The Farm Products Marketing Act has been around for 75 years at least, and it's not easy to update legislation. So the board works within the rules that they've been given authority over by the Farm Products Marketing Commission, and they set up the regulations that you follow. They set up the quota policies and procedures that you follow, and then they receive reports from the staff and they monitor compliance. They make sure things are working as they're supposed to. They deal with the feedback from the egg industry and the further processors and other partners in the business. They consider the concerns of the provincial government and the federal government. And then they deal with individual producers. There are often cases where someone's having a problem with something, and the board has a very user-friendly system for resolving matters. You work with the staff. If it can't be resolved, it comes before the board of directors, and they listen very carefully to what you have to say and make a decision. And sometimes they'll give you an exception to the rule, although that's somewhat challenging, because if you have too many exceptions, you don't have a rule. So, the board also monitors very closely the expenditure of your money, which is your producer license fees and levies. It's a very big operation, the Egg Board. And they work through the chair and speak on your behalf outside the boardroom, which, given the unique nature of the board and the privilege it has as a supply management agency, that's really, really important, because the politicians and the public have to have confidence that those special privileges are being used for the benefit of our society at large, not just for a few egg farmers. Legal authorities. Well, I mentioned the Farm Products Marketing Act. That's kind of that's the basis for your organization. And under that act, the provincial government agency, Farm Products Marketing Commission, passes a regulation that set the board up, dividing up the zones and the committee structure and the electoral process and that sort of thing. And then there's also a marketing regulation which gives your board the right to set prices, to establish quotas, to license you, to require you to hold a quota, and all those other rules that you need to become familiar with. There's another piece of legislation called the Commodity Boards and Marketing Agencies Act, and it basically came about as a result of a big court case back in the 70s called the Egg Reference Case that went to the Supreme Court of Canada. And at that time, there was a federal act that was being used to have these levies for what was then called surplus removal, as Harry has said. And parts of it were struck down as unconstitutional. So our provincial government, on your behalf, in an extremely big rush, passed this new law back then to allow you to have a levy. So it just demonstrates that your industry has always had really strong political support. I mean, all three parties have, over the years, generally been very supportive. So that law is the one that allows the levy to go up to help finance the national system. Then your board develops bylaws, which deal with procedural things, not really something most of you would need to worry about, but what goes on at a meeting and voting rights and so on. And then the general regulations, those are the rules that say you can't possess a hen without a quota, and you can only possess the hen on the premises that you've registered as such with the board, and so on and so on. All those rules are set out in the general regulations. And then the policies are a little more flexible. It's kind of like, if you're familiar with municipal law, you have the official plan which says this is what we want our town to look like in theory, green space, plazas, houses, whatever. But then there's a detailed zoning bylaw that has the specifics. So that's what you have here. So you need to know what's in those rules. Quotas, that's really the nuts and bolts of your system is the quota. That's the kind of the magic that makes the thing work. And I know you've all got a lot of money invested in your quotas, so they're very important. That's probably your biggest investment, but it's also your biggest responsibility to be sure that you're always on side with the quota rules. Sometimes things happen by accident, sometimes deliberate, and the consequences can be very, very severe. There are a lot of factors that go into how the board decides what to do with quota, and I've just listed some of them there. And that's not an exhaustive list. It's probably the most important words in the legislation are that quota can be fixed and allotted by the board on whatever basis it considers proper. That's pretty amazing, to have that kind of legal authority. Enforcement. Nobody likes to give up the right to do what you want, but the trade-off is quite significant here. You can't just put in any number of hens and do whatever you want on your egg farm. You have to follow all these rules, but the payoff is huge because you have a guaranteed market, you get paid regularly, you're looked after, you have a stable investment platform for your farm, and you're the envy of many other farmers who aren't in a supply managed commodity. So there are all these nasty things that the board could do to you if you won't comply with the rules. And over the years, I must say very rarely recently, but occasionally there'll be somebody offside. So quota can be reduced or canceled. There's an over quota levy that can be imposed, which can be quite significant financially. Additional allotments can be refused, or participation in the layer leasing pool, for example, could be refused. Maybe they wouldn't let you transfer your quota or buy more quota. You can be charged interest if you owe the board money. You can have your license suspended or canceled. And if you're really bad, we can take you to provincial court criminal division. You can be in there with all the guys charged with impaired driving and petty thievery and so on, and get a nice fine. That hasn't happened in years, but it's on the books. Also, there's a right to get an injunction, which is a court order to stop doing what you're doing. And occasionally, and we had one in Eastern Ontario a few years ago where that would have been the next step, would be an injunction to stop somebody from producing eggs without their quota. And then, of course, there's always the ability to sue somebody for collection of money. So, farmer compliance, you've heard what the board's mandate is. Your mandate is to be in compliance. And not only to be in compliance, but be able to show you're in compliance. And that's becoming more and more important with some of the new initiatives that the board has had to take to be dealing with the dynamics in the food industry, like animal care and housing density and all that stuff. It's not the core part of supply management, but nowadays it's equally important that you be right up on top of your production techniques and so on for egg quality and the good care of your hens, and that you write it all down or put it all in your computer somewhere, because you might be called upon to prove it. Okay, so that's the mandate part. I'll take any questions you have on that, if you do.